So thank you, Ben, for that. So I'm going to be walking you through a geography teacher scenario, assuming that you're an out-of-field teacher, you've just been thrown into Year 7 geography last minute. Maybe you've just got the email, late January before you're about to start school. I'm assuming you've sort of got an 8 to 10 week term. I know term 1 for government schools next year is 11 weeks, but that's fine. I'm going to sort of show you how you can be quite adaptable in using the book to suit the time period you have available, because we all know that, things come in the way. You've got swimming days, you've got athletics days, you've got, other school commitments with extracurriculars, etc., camps. So there are lots of interruptions. So we are used to being quite flexible. I'm assuming that we've got 2 lessons per week, 1 hour per lesson. And that's just based on my school where I teach. That's how much time we have with our humanities students. And I'm assuming that you have no prior planning. So you've just been thrown this class. You have absolutely, no background in geography teaching at all. And all you know is that you've got the Good Humanities textbook. So I'm going to show you how you can use Good Humanities as a resource to minimise your stress, but maximise your students' learning. And that's really what it comes down to, I think, for all of us. You want to minimise the administration and minimise that lesson planning, but maximise the outcome that your students can have. And even though you're an out-of-field teacher, you still want to give your students the best possible opportunities to learn those geographical skills. So the first suggested step that I give you is just to contact your geography team already, your humanities team, and see what's already in place. Even though everyone's changing textbooks, I'm assuming that you haven't used this textbook in the past and you'll have previous planning from either using other books or maybe not using a textbook in the past. So thinking about what planning already exists, how can you, approach the term in terms of what special events, like we said before, what assessment days, etc., do you need to factor in? What case studies and examples have been successful in the past? And that will become important as we move to the next couple of steps of how you'll plan. But it's also really important to think about what local examples are relevant. History in particular, we tend to think more globally in terms of our history in the junior years. But geography can focus really locally. We think water in the world is a huge topic. But just looking at the creek down the road from you can have a much bigger impact than looking at these massive, overseas catchment areas, because the students are actually genuinely interested and involved in their local community. Another concept to think about is off-campus fieldwork possible? And fieldwork in geography is really, really important because it not only gets students to understand the sort of theory and the concepts that you've learnt in class in their own backyard, but it also gives them experience in real geographical skills, like critical thinking, fieldwork techniques like field sketches, transects, what have you, which you just can't really learn in a classroom. So it's really important to get them outside. The next step is to think about the learning ladder, and this is really where our textbook differs from other books. In the past, I think using other books, I've sort of started with the skills section maybe, and you kind of just move quite quickly into the content. But what we're really trying to help you do here is understand what the students need to be able to do. And that's the real focus here, what they can do, not what they know. And so we're not really just focusing on the content anymore. We're trying to move past that and really focus on the skills. And so if we are focusing on skills, another thing that you need to be able to think about is what can you do? If you're an out-of-field teacher, what skills do you need to maybe brush up on or learn from scratch? And how can our textbook help you do that? I know in the past, I'm a geography teacher, but teaching humanities more broadly, I get history classes quite often. And so I go through the Good Humanities history side. I might do a few of the chapter questions. I might go through the masterclass. I might look through the how-to section as I'm teaching and provide that to my students. So you're trying to use that to help upskill yourself as well as your students. There's no shame in looking through, some of the older year level textbooks as well to upskill yourself, say, for the year 7 level. So what professional reading do you need to do, and how can you move up that learning ladder yourself? Learn with the kids. So Here we have the My Learning Pathway for Water on Earth for Year 7. This is one way that you could use the learning ladder, you know, as a pre-test, post-test monitoring sort of idea. You might ask the students instead to monitor throughout the term. Maybe after each lesson, they reassess where they are on the learning ladder. It might help guide your teaching. Are you challenging them to do, you know, slightly more challenging questions? So it's really up to you as to how you use this learning ladder. But the idea is that it's really focused on positive development. So instead of asking, you know, looking at students, oh, they've got an A+ or an F, what does that really mean? Getting an A+, does that mean that you're, you know, amazing at geography and, you know, you've learned everything there is to know about Year 7? Or does that mean that you've created some pretty good posters and, you know, your presentation and spelling and, you know, numeracy, while also all of that is important, what does it actually tell us? So this rubric is trying to help us look at the skills and really give us, you know, some clear descriptors as to where the students are at. So as textbook authors, we did not expect you to work through the entire book in chronological order from cover to cover. It's physically impossible. What we tried to do is give you options. And that's really important to keep in mind, because I think a lot of the time when we get a textbook, you look at it and you're just like, there's just so much. There's just so much. And I think we need to really keep in mind that we have, you know, that power as teachers to really think about what are our students interested in? What are we interested in a lot of the time? And how are we going to use resources to help engage our students and help them get the most out of a unit, okay? So what we're trying to help you do is use and learn and help the students guide them through these geographical skills using content as context, okay? The goal is not to get them to know everything there is about water. The goal is to use water as an example, a geographical example, to get them to do some field sketches, to get them to think analytically, to get them to do some group work, to get them outside doing field work and discovering things for themselves. So the Year 10 book in particular, we sort of really encourage you to sort of shop around by using the different key knowledge and place studies that we provide to suit, you know, your particular students' interests and needs. So keep that in mind as you move through. We didn't expect you to do everything. We expected you to sort of jump from page to page, and we've designed it in that way. So you've talked to your faculty, you've thought about where you might want to go on fieldwork or what your students might be interested in. Now what? So the first thing I'm going to direct you through is the curriculum. You need to become really familiar with what is expected, whether it's the Victorian curriculum, whether it's the Australian curriculum, what have you. It's important that you have that understanding of where you're going. Then what I like to do is start with case studies, because examples in geography are priceless. Just learning theory doesn't really create any understanding. You know, it's like learning a maths equation, for example, and you're just using equation after equation. We're not actually using them to think about anything or solve any problem. They kind of just become, you know, a routine sort of nothing. In the same way with geography, if you're just constantly learning theory but not applying it to examples, it doesn't really mean anything. So starting with case studies, thinking about what places do my students want to learn about? Are you located near a river system or a catchment area? Again, we're referring to this Year 7 Water in the World case study unit example. So if you're near something like that, I mean, amazing. You've instantly got a really well-known case study for your students to reference. You know, what situations are relevant to them, your region? Do you live rurally and lots of students have water tanks, for example? Are you in a flood-prone or drought-prone area? Can you link that into your case studies? And then a good idea, I love sticky tabs, so I'm going to reference these a lot, but go through the textbook and find our local, national and global case studies and tab the ones that you think are relevant to your students or your region, okay? Because you might want to, you know, take, for example, the Thompson Dam and you're near another reservoir yourself, and you think, oh, we'll learn about this and then we'll apply it to our field work at our particular reservoir, okay? Once you've gone through and you've selected the case studies you think your students will enjoy and you're interested in as well. Then you go back through those sort of more content and theoretical pages and think, what do my students actually need to know in order to understand that case study? So for the, the reservoir example, the dam example, they need to understand water catchments. They might need to understand, river flow, environmental flows, cultural flows. They might need to understand the water cycle. So go back through and tab those other pages. And all of a sudden, instead of using every single page, you've worked your knowledge and background theory towards a case study where students are going to be able to apply that and use skills to understand a real life, model and a real life system. The other option, instead of focusing on case studies, outside of your region, you might focus on field work as sort of your end goal. And you think about, how can the fieldwork chapter in the Good Humanities series, which I think is very different to other, books in the past as well, how can that really help inform what we're going to do? Are we just going to get the students, within the same school environment running around and exploring different water sources? Are we going to get them to do some fieldwork at their own homes? Are we going to actually take a group off campus and really explore some outside water sources, whether it be a river catchment, whether it be maybe a treatment plant? I mean, that would be awesome. What context then do the students need to have in order to understand their field work? So again, going back through the book and thinking, okay, I'm going to take them to a water treatment plant. What theory do they need to understand? What concepts do they understand in order to work towards that? Then think about what skills they're going to need in order to complete that field work. Do you want them to go out and do some field sketches? Do you want them to take photos? Do you want them to do surveys, traffic tallies or questionnaire surveys? And how can you incorporate those skills into your classroom to practice those before you go out? And then think about, are there case studies within the book which are going to help inform our field work as well? So again, going back through, tabbing the book and thinking, right, how are we going to work towards this sort of field work goal? Once you've done that and you've tabbed all your pages and you say, yep, I've got about 10 content pages I think are really helpful. I've got about 3 case studies, or we've got our end goal field work. The rest is done for you. So once you select, spread G 1.3, which is all about where is the world's water, as one of your content pages that you'd like to sort of do in preparation for your case studies or your field work. The lesson plans are already there in your teaching planning in the online portal. And we've done your learning intentions. We've given you how you can use the learning ladder, how you can teach through doing, and then the skills and the success criteria that we're looking for by the end of that lesson. And so we've provided you with worksheets, provided you with quizzes, and you can use those for your flipped learning. You might use your quizzes as, an exit ticket or some, ongoing formative assessment to check students' understanding and align them against the learning ladder to see how they're progressing. A masterclass at the end of the chapter might be a good way to check skill progression, or a capstone might be, instead of a field work, to summarise that learning. So what I suggest that you do is you take that teaching planner, which is this top table here, and you look at all the sticky tabs that you've done and you just delete the lessons that aren't relevant to you, or you go through and you highlight the lessons that are relevant to you. Now, I've written these to my particular, teaching style or interest, or the students that I've taught in the past. So it's a Word document. By all means, go through, update, add, your local region. They have your local catchment management authority has a really good website with great resources, or some GIS capability. That would be fantastic to throw in. So you can work as a team then to adapt the resource rather than just starting from scratch and you're looking at a blank Word document, a huge textbook, thinking, oh, I don't know where to start. So I think one of the questions that I really get is, why all this fuss about skills? In the past, I think we probably opened a textbook, read page 68, answer the knowledge questions. Good, you know about the water cycle, move on. But really think about, how we teach maths or English, for example. Our goal in English is not to get the students to memorize an entire novel. We use different novels each year or different storytelling to teach language, teach interpretations, creativity, analysis, critical thinking, what have you. And these are all English skills. So why then do we expect students to memorize, geography? Why do we expect them to memorize every capital of the world? Why do we expect them to, rote learn the water cycle and then redraw it on a test under test conditions? Because it's not very realistic. We might ask students to do some memorization. For example, in English, you need to remember some quotes and some evidence in order to justify your analysis. And we ask them to students do that the same in geography, memorize some quantitative data, for example, to justify, their analysis of a particular process or phenomenon. Okay, but we're not asking them to, by the end of year 7, if my year 7s come out and don't know the intricacies of the water cycle, the intricacies of, storing water, I don't think that I failed as a teacher. If they come out and they can do some really great fieldwork drawings, if they can look at a new case study that they've never seen before and think, oh, that's similar to this, and they managed this situation by doing this, this, and this, I wonder whether that would work in this scenario. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for them to be able to think critically and analyse and cross-compare and find interconnections rather than rote learn content. When we look at the Victorian curriculum and beyond in terms of VCE geography and the study design, these are all the skills that are accessible by year 12. And it sort of covers around 3 to 4 pages. And it's very difficult when you get students, coming in to you in Victoria at year 11 and 12, and they haven't really had this focus on skills in the past, and you ask them to do some, use geospatial technology or rank things or, complete some geographical graphing, for example. Very hard to teach this from scratch, say year 10 and 11, for it to be accessible in year 12. What we really need to be doing is starting this really early, like all the way down to prep. Obviously, the skills and the way you're going to introduce and teach this is going to be very different depending on the year level that you're teaching. I'm not expecting preps to be able to use geospatial technology in the same way as a year 12 can. But that's no reason that they shouldn't have, some involvement and some introduction to these kinds of cool skills. And so start using our textbook to teach skills rather than content means that you're empowering students to prepare for future education, but also empowering them from beyond. They're not necessarily in their particular chosen career going to need to know, the everything about water, everything about landscapes, or everything about biomes and food security. But it's going to be very useful for them to be able to do some formal writing, for them to be able to rank and graph and analyse data and come to conclusions based on evidence. And that's what these skills are working students towards. So as a result, the how-to section shouldn't be used as a separate chapter. It shouldn't be like, all right, let's look through the how-to chapter. Cool, you guys know the skills now. Let's focus on the content. It should be one of those chapters, again, you stick a tab, and that you constantly are flipping back to all the time. You'll notice at the bottom of each question block on each of the spreads, there's references to the how-to guide. So students, as they're working through the questions, should be flipping back and forth as PQE, how do I do that again? Oh yeah, here's a worked example of that. Or what does scale mean? Oh, here's an explanation for that. And you as an out-of-field teacher can also be constantly referencing this or guiding students back to this to help support your teaching as well. So it should be more of a glossary of skills rather than a separate chapter that the students do learn, move on. Another comment that I've had about the book is that there's not many words. And I think that's quite scary because if you don't know, the geography content, if you don't know the curriculum well, not having text to support you is sort of takes you a little bit to get used to. But I think what it does, instead of looking at it as a scary thing, you should look at it as something that really empowers you. What we've done is we've just selected the information to write down as text, the really important stuff that we think gives students really good context to understand the skills. And we've taken away all the fluff, all that additional stuff that will just go straight over their head. And we've all been in those classrooms where, you're reading the textbook out to the students and that 90% of them are drifting off. They're not concentrating. And we've really focused on those visuals and getting them to think about, all right, Earth is referred to as the blue planet. 70% of it is covered in water. Let's have a look at that. Here's a map. What do you see? What does the legend mean? Tell me some of the continents that you see and how the water is distributed there. Oh, this is a weird graph. What do you think that means? And as a result, you're figuring things out together. You're teaching each other rather than just reading words and then answering questions. So it's going to be a little bit scary at the start. And you might, maybe on purpose, you choose some of the wordier spreads to begin with to get your confidence up. But I'm hoping that as you move through, you work as a team with the class to really discover things. At year 7, a lot of the things that we're teaching them, they're the gaps in the knowledge in terms of us, as geosciences is quite small. They're not, year 7s aren't discovering things new, but for, the broader community. But for themselves, all of this is new. So discover with them, get excited about them finding things out. So during, COVID-19, we've all had to really sit back and reflect, what do we really want the students to get out of classes? Because there's only so long you can sit on Zoom. There's only so long you can get them to read through a textbook and answer questions before it's sort of like, well, what are we actually trying to do here? Are we just trying to get through the year? Or what's sort of our key goals that we want for the students? And for me, throughout this COVID time, it's really been, what fundamental skills do I need the students to be able to learn here, to be able to move on to the following year levels and succeed, but also move through school and beyond and have success. So we know the humanities often gets overlooked. We have very limited lesson time. And that's another reason that skills are so important, because skills are transferable between years. If we're constantly focusing on that content, just trying to drive that content home and then assessing with tests, all that means is that we're asking students to memorize things, we're putting pressure on them to do that, and then they mind dump it for the next year. But if we're teaching them skills and we're using different examples and content as context, then they just keep practicing things over and over and they're going to master those skills. The other thing that we need to think about is that, most schools these days have some kind of, technology involved. The students have a BYO, laptop, or there's an iPad program, or there's computer labs, whatever it is. And so it's quite a content-ready world for them. Students, if you ask them to a research assignment, they have no problem jumping on Google and trying to find information. But what we need to teach them is how to find that information. We don't find maps on Google Images. Things like that. That's a skill that needs to be taught. We also need to think about reliability of sources, teaching all of these, which is transferable between history and geography and beyond. Thinking creatively and critically about ideas rather than just accepting everything that you read. So again, that is a skill, using content as context for that skill. So as a result, hopefully this is a resource for you and not a traditional textbook. Well, hopefully we're helping you focus on the data, examples and skills, sort of whether you like it or not. We're kind of forcing you to look at those skills by providing you with all of this data and focusing the questions that we're asking the students to complete around that data analysis. We didn't want students to be carrying around this massive textbook that's full of words that they're never going to read. We wanted it to be a launching pad for you to have discussions, further student research, and spark ideas within your classroom. Who knows, you might start on a spread talking about where water is in the world, and next minute you're off on this tangent on Google Earth looking at something, and it really sparks ideas in your classroom. So that's all from me. I hope that was helpful in terms of our new textbook. I hope you really enjoy using it. And I know for me, it's been a pleasure writing it. And I hope, between all of the supports that you have with this amazing resource, you can really have good lessons in your humanities classroom.